My name is Cathy Wolf. I was born in Washington, D.C. on May 25, 1947. I lived there until I was 16, when I moved to Chevy Chase, Maryland. The D.C. neighborhood I lived in, Tacoma Park, was integrated. I went to public schools. Perhaps it's nostalgia, but I think of those times as innocent times. Kids rode their bikes, skated, walked, and took public transportation everywhere without their parents worrying that something bad would happen to them. I have had ALS for 17 years. I don't think of myself as disabled. After so many years, this is the new normal. I can often think, solve problems and use the computer better than my caregivers. But when my grandchildren visit, and Joel plays with them in ways I can't, I am sad. Also, when I go out and I am always the most disabled. Sometimes I think, why me? Most of the time, I focus on what I can't do, not what I can. Some people code by saying ALS is a gift. I think they mean they appreciate every day, and often their priorities change from their jobs to family and friends. I hate ALS. I think it is one of the worst diseases on the planet. There is not a typical case of ALS. Some people start with a limb affected. Some have speech affected. A few have breathing affected. I'd describe my case as slowly losing the use of my legs, my arms, my ability to swallow, and finally my ability to breathe, while my mind remained sharp as ever. I am optimistic by nature. I decided to live with ALS rather than die with it. I look forward to emailing with family and friends, though not to deleting stuff in my inbox. I enjoy writing and reading poetry, the occasional visitor, sitting outside in summer. I was a shy kid, but determined. In elementary school, I was a patrol, helping younger kids cross streets. I was strongly influenced by the International Geophysical Year, which lasted from July 1957 to December 1958. During that time, Sputnik 1 was launched, followed by the American Explorer 1. It seemed to me that science was the important subject. In 8th grade, with my father's help, I made a pinhole camera for the science fair. I took pictures and explained how it worked. I won first place in the DC Science Fair for my grade. That got me into the Washington Junior Academy of Sciences. In high school, I was program chair of the organization. I guess I was a nerd. I came of age in the Vietnam War era. That made me a leftist. It made me skeptical of what government says. Also, my parents are liberals. My mother was an economist. I think she was the first woman to testify as an expert witness before the Federal Power Commission. My father was an engineer and writer. He was the editor-in-chief for the WPA Guide to New York City. In the McCarthy era, he was blacklisted. As a result, he was barred from government and other jobs, so he started a small sewing machine store. You can Google Celia Gotti and Lou Gehrig. They have been married 77 years. I have a younger sister, Dale, who is a clinical psychologist. I took ballet and jazz dance as a child and teenager, then resumed jazz in 1986 in Westchester. I was a good swimmer as a child. I wrote some poetry in high school and took creative writing in college. I guess my interest in poetry is related to my fascination with all aspects of language, rhyme, meter, different ways of saying things. I didn't choose psychology as my major until second semester sophomore year. I didn't know much about psychology until college. I liked that it was experimental. I was particularly interested in language development. I went to Tufts University as an undergraduate and then to grad school at Brown. I majored in psychology, and I was a postdoc at MIT for a time after that. In my sophomore year, there were 2 computer dating services, one at MIT called Contact, and the better-known one at Harvard, Match. They cost about $3, and everyone was doing them. I did both. Joel was on my list and called me. Our first date was at a be-in at Franklin Park Zoo at my suggestion. A be-in was a 60s thing, in which young people just hung out. In graduate school, I did programs with punch cards. I used a terminal to do statistical analyses. When I was a postdoc at MIT, I spent the summer of 1976 at the IBM Thomas J. Watson Research Center working on a speech system. I hoped that my summer would help me get hired the following year. But I would first work at Bell Labs. I learned about ELIZA, one of the first computer programs to interact with humans in a seemingly intelligent way. Then at Bell Labs in the early 1980s, I worked on the very first cell phone. It was so big and expensive, we thought only traveling salespeople would use it. At that time, speech recognition could only be done on a bulky mainframe. I didn't envision the cell phones of today. My early work at IBM was on using gestures, like proofreaders' marks, as a user interface and for collaboration. I led a team that made an exhibit for the Smithsonian Information Age exhibit. With a colleague, I invented the first gesture-based system for collaboration called augment. It is similar to present-day smartboards. Then the conversation machine, which allowed people to ask questions in their own way, instead of choosing from menus. Most projects at IBM Research involve a group of 5 to 10 people. We used IBM's speech recognition and natural language understanding that were eventually showcased in Watson's appearance on Jeopardy! We had 2 applications. the banking system and a system to help customers choose a personal computer. I was the user interface expert. I figured out the different ways people might say things and tested the system. It always amazed me how few women were in management at Bell Labs and IBM Research. At Bell Labs, we had sexism workshops in which a male manager admitted that he had been relying on the man in the project instead of me. Also, I was criticized for being too aggressive, which I am sure would have been seen as leadership in a man. At IBM, there were few women, and I was in human-computer interaction, which was regarded as soft science. In the first group award for the gesture project, I was not included. I pointed out my contributions and got my own award. I had some success in demonstrating the value of studying customers upfront and that the user interface couldn't be tacked on at the end. Erica was born when I was a postdoc, and Laura was born at Bell Labs. In the early days of women's liberation and consciousness-raising groups, which I was in at Brown, we looked down on women with children. As a result, I was ambivalent about children. But Joel wanted kids. From the moment I knew I was pregnant, I was enthusiastic. Erica and Laura are a very important part of my life. I started running at age 39 with a group at IBM. It was a social activity, in addition to the runner's high. At 40, I entered my first 10K and won first place in my age group. Figuring out I had ALS was a long road. I was in modern dance and couldn't flex my left foot. Also, every time I ran, my left calf would hurt after. I was 49. I had sensory symptoms not typical of the disease. Also, an immune protein that suggested a neuropathy showed up in my blood. I thought it might be Lyme's, and I had IV antibiotics. I didn't progress as fast as is typical. I went to Columbia University's ALS Center many times, Johns Hopkins twice, and finally Beth Israel, where they said I had a smoldering case of ALS. From the time I noticed the first symptoms to the time I went to Beth Israel was 2.5 years. I knew ALS was a possibility much earlier than the final diagnosis. My mother accompanied to Beth Israel. We hugged each other and cried. To their credit, no doctor told me I had 2 to 5 years to live. There is a coping mechanism in which the typical patient afflicted with a disease thinks at the outset she or he will fare better than the typical patient. I had this attitude. Most people die within 2 to 5 years of diagnosis. About 5 to 10% survive more than 10 years. When I was working with ALS, IBM was great. Before my tracheostomy, they hired a full-time assistant, then a nurse to help me. They bought assisted technology to help me work. For a while, I operated a switch with my foot, and I routinely came to meetings with one shoe on. I worked 2.5 years after my tracheostomy. They gave me a big office to accommodate my nurse and aide and allowed me to work at home several days a week. IBM is self-insuring, meaning they make decisions on what is covered and not. The insurance company is just the administrator. In the beginning of 2004, they wanted to deny me all nursing, but I fought and won. Ever since, they have approved almost everything. One of our former cats had a red star on his record because he was dangerous at the vet. I like to think I have a red star on my insurance record. The health policies in this country don't encourage people to go on a ventilator. Medicare puts people in a nursing home where they have mediocre care and are exposed to infection. Most private insurance doesn't cover nursing or aides. I had to fight for nurses. Sometimes I was proactive, like getting the feeding tube about 4 months before I really needed it. Sometimes not, like with the stair lift. Joel was pushing my butt up the stairs. By the way, I am no longer able to sit upright on the stair lift, so I sleep in the family room. The cruelest loss was the loss of speech. In the summer and fall of 1999, I recorded some phrases for each ventriloquist. My speech gradually got harder to understand. I always knew I wanted to go on the ventilator, but the incident that precipitated it took me by surprise. After a bad night, I found myself on my back in the emergency room of Columbia Presbyterian Hospital. I was faced with the question of whether to have a tracheostomy, a procedure that allows you to breathe with a ventilator and also makes breathing on your own easier. The question wasn't if. The question was whether this was the right time. As victims of car accidents flooded the ER, the ALS team tried to convince me it was the right time. I remember the nurse practitioner, a long-time member of the team, said that refusing would be like writing "do not resuscitate" on my chart. I asked, will I be able to go to Erica's graduation in Boston early in June? The answer was yes. I had researched the changes that tracheostomy would bring, and I just wanted to delay them a few months. I knew I'd never be alone again because of the need to remove secretions from my lungs and the danger of mucus plugs that could kill me. My husband Joel held my hand and whispered, "It's really time." I decided, better 6 months early than 6 months late. I took the biggest breath I could and said, yes. When I had my tracheostomy in May 2001, air bypassed my vocal cords and I couldn't make a sound. My activity with other people who have ALS is issue-based, like the recent FDA hearing on ALS drug development. I also check the patientsliken.com ALS forum at least once a month to see if I can add anything. I will always try to help someone who asks me. The Muscular Dystrophy Association has referred several people to me. When I took the ALS Functional Rating Scale (ALSFRs) on patientsliken.com, I got a 1 out of 48. I knew there were abilities I had that the scale didn't measure. With researchers from Patients Liken, I developed and tested additional items that distinguished among patients with advanced ALS. They were incorporated into the official rating scale. In my career, I wrote more than 100 research articles. I have 6 patents. But of all the research I have done, I am most proud of this. "78 breaths per minute," 8. Not dead yet. The great cat remains faithful. Curled at my feet or stretched long on my body, his furry warmth comforts me through gnawing nightmares and the loneliness of 3 a.m. He knows without knowing the kindness of touch. I started writing poetry after I went on long-term disability. I started online poetry classes at thewriterstudio.com in the fall of 2010. In the online poetry classes, I learned that the persona narrator who tells the story is a fictional creation, not the author. Many people assume when I write a poem about loss, I am depressed. That is not so. Facebook, for all its annoyances, is a great way to share things with your friends. I also have a fan club page on which I share information about ALS. It provides people an easy way to share your passions. I get up at 10, get to the computer by 1, do email. Some of this is personal email and some is political. Then I work on my poetry class, which involves writing, critiquing and reading. Or I work on an article, update my Facebook fan club, or check my personal Facebook, or do the brain-computer interface. At 10 I watch TV, usually news or The Daily Show. While I watch TV, the nurse does evening care. I am in bed between 11:30 and midnight. The nurse continues care in bed. I am asleep between 12:30 and 1. I don't sleep well, typical of advanced ALS. The nurse and the aide help me. Exciting. I fight for many things. Abortion rights, equality, same-sex marriage and equality, ending the Iraq and Afghanistan wars and not starting others, First Amendment rights, doing something meaningful about global warming, ending the death penalty, preserving the environment and saving endangered species, animal rights, immigration reform, healthcare reform, gun control, etc. In the future, I hope the world will become a fairer, kinder, more peaceful place. I hope terrible diseases like ALS and cancer will be cured. I think personal medicine is an important approach. And I hope my kids and grandkids and other family members will be happy, whatever that means for them.